A lot of the inspections PHMSA does is O&M, operation and maintenance inspection, when the pipeline's in operation after product's been introduced into it. But we also do some when the pipelines are originally constructed and built. These are construction inspections. And this figure here shows a typical layout, start to finish, of a project, construction project for a pipeline. You start with surveying and clearing of the site. Then you lay out the pipe sections, welding of the pipe sections together. And then you dig the pipeline trench. You do the actual construction inspections. I'm going to go over the various things that's involved in that in a minute. Lowering the pipe into the trench, we call that lowering in. And then backfilling the trench and the pipeline. You want to make sure there's using the right type of salt backfill, quality backfill, without a lot of rocks and things like that would impinge on the pipe and damage it. Then you hydro test the pipeline. It's kind of a pressure test to make sure the integrity of the pipeline and it's not going to rupture or fail. And then finally the site restoration. And here's kind of a general picture of people working, doing some welding and construction activities down in the trench. They got to have the ladders and everything sloped back and safely get out of there, and everybody's wearing their hard hats and all that. There's a lot of things to look for to make sure the work's being done safely, and that you're going to have a good quality construction project in the end. Welding pipelines are very difficult. PHMSA inspectors, there's training courses you can go to become a certified pipeline welding inspector, CPWI. I did that back in 2019 and took a 6-hour exam with both written and hands-on visual. It's a pretty intensive exam, but you can get your CPWI license and get a lot of training on what to look for and find these weld defects and how to inspect. But you can see it's a very difficult job. These guys make a lot of money doing this. You have to be able to weld in multiple positions, and you have to be qualified and demonstrate that. And if you have rejects, you can be sent off the job. You know, they come all the way from Texas out to Georgia and with their expensive welding machine equipment, and you know, there's not many opportunities. You've got to show your competence and that you're qualified to do this work. And it's very strenuous and in the heat, and you got to be able to do it under multiple positions, like this guy doing the stick welding here. There's various processes: submerged arc welding, MIG, tungsten. I mean, there's all kind of, and there's mechanized welding too, where they have clamps and machines and come in and can do it all automated. But this guy here is doing the manual stick welding with the welding electrodes or rods. And then the welding qualification, there's usually a standard like API 1104 is what they have to follow. And this shows them doing what they call nick breaks, where they've cut straps out of, you can see they've got a circumferential weld around this pipe, and they've cut out these straps out of there. Some of them are laying on the table here, and here they're got some bars, cheater bars. They're trying to bend it to see if it can pass the nick break test. And then they've got these root bend tests as well, where they bend the straps. All these things that the weld should be theoretically even stronger than the pipe material if it's done right. And all the passes, the root pass, the root bead, hot pass, all the various, if they follow the welding procedure, which is also qualified, it should be a very strong weld and can pass these tests without breaking. Or if it does break, you know, per the API 1104 guidelines. Sometimes on construction projects, the pipe has to change direction. It has to be bent, and they have mandrels and other bending machines, ways they can properly bend the pipeline like they're showing here. So that's called bending. And then another important, beyond the welding, probably the next biggest construction activity on pipelines that we inspect is the coating inspection. And here, this is examples of what they call jeeping, where they have this loop and a jeeper instrument here. It runs along and looks for defects in the coating or holidays, like I mentioned before. And it'll start jeep, jeep, jeep. It'll, let them know if there's a defect in the coating that has to be touched up or repaired properly. So anyway, they call that jeeping, looking for holidays in the coating. We also occasionally get to go to pipe mills. This is an example of one of the stations where they've got a spiral seam steel pipeline here at the pipe mill. You'll also see other stations in the mills where they got the coals and plates of steel going through and being quenched. And anyway, this is after it's already been rolled into these spiral seams on this particular type of pipe. Another thing you might find at the mills, sometimes they do their own coating process. This shows how they coat the pipe with this FBE application. FBE stands for fusion bonded epoxy. That's one of the modern types of coating. Back in the 40s and 50s, they used a lot of coal tar and other vintage pipe coatings. But now, pretty much a lot of what you'll see is that green-looking pipe that's got the FBE, fusion bonded epoxy. That's a really good coating. It works well with the CP systems. But this shows the different stages where they preheat it and blast clean it and grind the surface defects, do the surface inspection, extrude the polyethylene and the copolymers, heat induction, surface treatment, and they quench it, do an electrical inspection, stockpile it. It shows the whole diagram of the process for coating at the factory or the mill. And then finally, once the project's ready to be completed, they do what they call a hydrostatic pressure test. And this is an example of the test header's been welded on, and they've got they filled it full of water. All the water has to be drained out and gotten out of there at the end and safely disposed of. But anyway, you monitor that test, and it can be real dangerous if the thing ruptures, or a lot of people get killed. So only qualified people, and there's certain marked off limits where everybody can stand. But involved in these hydro tests, you've got things like chart recorders and dead weights and gauges that have to be properly calibrated. That's kind of what this shows in a hydrostatic pressure test. And then a lot of times when they have to dig a pipe up to repair an anomaly, there's other type of non-destructive examination, or NDE, or non-destructive test, NDT. But a common one is a magnetic particle, where they spray the weld and then put this magnetic, they can do the magnetic particle thing and see if there's any cracks in the welds, and that's what this guy's doing here. And then a more modern, this is kind of a phased array, is an ultrasonic technique. It's a high-tech, another way they can do non-destructive examination or testing on welds and other features of the pipeline using these high-tech instruments. This shows the Elba Island LNG facility, liquefied natural gas, LNG. They do a lot of exports with the ships to other countries. But you have the large LNG tanks and the piping and all. The Coast Guard, we share jurisdiction with the Coast Guard on some of this marine stuff where the ships come in and at the ports and docks. But there's all kind of LNG trains and stuff at the piping. DOT has some jurisdiction over a lot of it. And this shows one of the ones, southern region, inspected. I've been out to Elba Island a couple of times. And this falls under, I mentioned part 192 of the regulations is natural gas or gas, and part 195 is hazardous liquids. LNG falls under Part 193. We generally, the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 190 through 199 is kind of what PHMSA has to be familiar with and enforces, make sure that the operators are complying with those sections of or parts of the regulations. But like I say, 192 and 195 are the ones we deal with the most in the field. But on LNG, 193 is the applicable set of regulations. And we also, in some cases, like in Florida, southern region has a lot of jurisdictional LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. You're familiar with that, like in your gas grills, your barbecues got the propane tanks. But there's some operators that have large LPG facilities and tanks that we have to inspect if it falls within our jurisdiction. AmeriGas is one that comes to mind down in Florida. This next slide is something we have to be familiar with. Our pipeline inspectors in many cases are engineers. We do have some transportation specialists that might have a degree in something else like management or came from pipeline operators with a lot of experience in oil and gas industry experience, or maybe worked in the military with POL, petroleum oil lubricant systems and things like that, got their experience that way. Like I say, there's some engineering background that everybody has to learn, because we have to review a lot of documentation of how they determine how they design their piping components to withstand the hoop stress at a design pressure. This is the Barlow formula for hoop stress, and it's the way you calculate the design pressure. It's basically 2 times the yield strength, which is a lot of times known as SMICE, specified minimum yield strength. But anyway, 2 times the yield strength times the wall thickness of the pipeline divided by the outside diameter of the pipeline. That's that T/D ratio that's important. And then you multiply it by a design factor. In the regulations, depending on the conditions and circumstances, you'll have different design factors that are required. 0.72 comes to mind as a pretty common one. The E and the T in that equation, the longitudinal joint factor and the temperature derating factor, and when I took the courses, we usually assumed those were 1, so you could really drop those, and it's really 2ST/D times the design factor. Unfortunately, I don't have a worked out example here, but it's a fairly straightforward equation once you get used to it. But there's all kind of special qualifications and caveats in the regulations that you have to read carefully to make sure to figure out what the weakest link in the pipeline system is. There could be different components that might have a different rating that might make them the weakest link, and you have to take all that into account when you design your pipeline system. In one other area, like I say, the smaller systems, a lot of times they've gone to these polyethylene plastic pipe materials for the pipelines, where they have machines where you have butt fusion, where you kind of heat fusion the joints, or you could have mechanical couplings. But a lot of stuff in residential and maybe smaller distribution systems, they've gone to a lot of this, they call it PE pipe, polyethylene. It's got to be a certain grade and quality of materials. That's pretty common. But like I say, on the transmission lines that we inspect at the federal level, most of what we inspect is steel pipelines that are designed for really high pressure, a lot more than these plastic pipelines could withstand. PHMSA has also got a accident investigation division out in Oklahoma City. I mentioned the main training and qualifications training facilities out there too in Oklahoma City. But they have some investigators work remotely, but they have their main AID, they call it, Accident Investigation Division in Oklahoma. And they work, a lot of times we have people do metallurgical testing and root cause analysis reports that assist us, that the operators have to part of their remediation plans. The operators have to pay to bring these experts in independently, help us determine why pipelines fail. But here's an example of kind of one that along the long seam opened up during when a pipe exploded or ruptured. A lot of times the girth welds, sometimes the pipelines have what they call a long seam, and if they've not staggered them, if they all line up in the same direction, it can just kind of open up and run down the long length of the pipeline. But this is the kind of thing that has to be investigated to determine why the pipeline failed. Like I say, there's a lot of metallurgical analysis and root cause failure analysis that's done. And the regions work with AID on those investigations. And once they determine why it happened, if there's any violations of the Code of Federal Regulations, the regions might have to do enforcement actions, which I'll talk about in a minute. But anyway, that's the failure investigation or accident investigations. If it's a major accident with loss of life or lots of damage, the DOT has there's an NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, might come in, the same body that comes in and investigates airplane crashes, and they would take over and lead the whole federal response. They would take the lead over PHMSA, over the EPA, and all the other federal agencies that come out there to be part of the investigation. But NTSB would take the lead in those extreme cases of a major accident. Another specialty area I wanted to mention, PHMSA's got a very robust R&D program, research and development, up at headquarters in DC. And the regions get the work and support that program as well. We have people that are trained to be AORs, Agreement Officers Representatives, kind of like a contracting officer's representative with the Corps of Engineers where I used to work. Anyway, I've been an AOR on some of these R&D projects. And they also have TTIs, Technical Task Inspectors. I've been that as well. And we get to, make sure that these principal investigators and researchers are doing what's in the agreement and kind of monitoring that they're meeting the milestones and that we're getting a good report and final product. Normally we partner on these CAAP projects. It's the academic ones with the universities where you have the PhD researchers. We partner with them and they advance new technologies and scientific theories, and have their they publish their papers and present them at symposiums and things like that. And we also have the SBIR, the small business, where we partner with the small businesses on these commercialized technologies to advance safety. And then PHMSA has the core research and development program where we have any stakeholder that can commercialize technologies that advance safety can be involved in the core program. And then we also partner some with other federal entities under this interagency research for regulatory reform and safety initiatives. And the outputs of all this is general knowledge, and we hope products and technology that can possibly be commercialized. So it's a comprehensive research execution strategy. Like I said, there's a lot to learn, but PHMSA has a very good training program. And this is kind of a list of a lot of the courses you can see on gas pipeline systems, breakout tanks, corrosion control, plastic and composite materials, HAZWOPER and fire safety, welding, regulators and overpressure protection, regulatory compliance, hazardous liquid pipelines, failure investigation, integrity management fundamentals, inline inspection, ILI, root cause investigations, SCADA systems, control room management, hazardous liquid integrity management, external corrosion direct assessment, ECDA, operator qualification, OQ, integrated inspections using the IA tool, the inspection assistant tool that we use, gas integrity management, LNG, LPG, and then HAZWOPER refreshers. And then there's a lot of electives like a DIMP, that's a Distribution Integrity Management Program, Underground Natural Gas Storage, UNGS they call it, Safety Management Systems, SMS, Public Awareness. Like I say, those are the main courses. And then you've got the web-based training that you take before you go to those. Let me see if I can get it all on one page here. There's a whole list of those as well, like odorization, the regulations. A lot of them overlap with the other courses, like the welding and the CP and all that. But you've got gas laws and fluid mechanics and pigging and launching and receiving, drug and alcohol, high consequence areas, internal corrosion direct assessment, stress corrosion cracking, SEC, risk assessment, and the list goes on and on. Like I say, you're expected to take those on the computer, on the web-based, before you go, like prerequisites. And then PHMSA will also approve you to take all kind of external courses. Like there's various underground corrosion short courses in West Virginia and Indiana. And then there's PTEX, that's Petroleum Extension out in Texas, and CPWI, the welding inspection out in Texas, technical toolboxes and others. So this kind of list here shows a lot of those. You could even go to get NACE certified for the coatings and all that, and the corrosion control. There's stuff on AC interference, methane emissions, the mega rule they call it, with the new regulations that came out not too long ago. And PHMSA's also recently, they've got the leadership development programs, the advanced, the intermediate, and the basic leadership development courses. I've taken all those and highly recommend them. So there's tons of training, and it takes 3 to 5 years to learn it all. And you never stop learning. In addition to all that, the DOT's got its own LMS, Learning Management System training on the U.S. Constitution and ethics, and you name it. There's tons of required mandatory training courses we have to take on DOT Learns. And the best part is the on-the-job training, the OJT program, which has just been coming out. This is kind of an overview flow chart of it. But it's where you go out with experienced inspectors and shadow them your first few years and observe and learn the style of how to do an inspection and what to look for. And they've now formalized the program where you've got Quizlets and other things. You can work with your supervisor and be evaluated and make sure you're progressing, and learning what you need to be learning your first few years on the job. But the OJT problem's probably the best to supplement all that classroom learning out at TQ. I won't say too much about some of the nuances and details in this overview video, but working for PHMSA also involves using the inspection assistant platform to document your inspections and record what you observed in the records, procedures, and field observations. And there's a work management system that involves where we keep up with our time and enforcement actions and various processes and procedures we have to follow. And we do data-driven, risk-informed inspections using those platforms. And basically, when an operator doesn't comply with the safety regulations, there can be enforcement cases. And there's all kind of acronyms, but this shows some of the enforcement letters that could be issued with either civil penalties, like a fine, or it could require a compliance order where the operator might have to shut down the pipeline and remediate an unsafe condition before they could return it to service. But just to quickly go over CPWF is a compliance process file, aka the case file. An NOPV is a notice of probable violation. PCP is a proposed civil penalty. There's a calculation guidelines and a worksheet on how those are calculated based on the severity of the violation. A compliance order is usually abbreviated CO, or a PCO if it's just a proposed compliance order initially. A violation report, something the inspector has to fill out to help do those other documents. NOA is a notice of amendment. That's to an operator's procedures if they need to make amendments to their procedures. A warning letter could be issued. Those usually have code citations in them, or it could just be a letter of concern, an LOC. That's not part of the public record, and there's no code citations mentioned in those letters. It's just kind of something we're concerned about, but we can't really tie it firmly to a regulation. CAO it stands for Corrective Action Order. That usually follows the major accidents or pipeline failure investigations, where the operator has to do certain things by an order of corrective actions. And then we have to do CAO data reports. It uses a template that we fill out within a couple of days of the incident to help the attorneys draft the CAO for the administrator to assign before it goes out. A NOPSO is a notice of proposed safety order. Sometimes those are followed by a consent agreement in lieu of a hearing. That's when something needs to go out. It's a major safety issue, and you have to issue an order to get something corrected for safety reasons. A PVW is a probable violation worksheet that we do in the southern region to help draft these enforcement letters. The levels of enforcement are usually determined by the region director with input from the operations supervisors and the region attorneys and others. But the region director has the enforcement authority, and he signs the enforcement letter that initially goes out. So he gets to decide what level of enforcement to put in the letter. There's a PI process we follow, a pipeline inspection, investigation, and enforcement process. And it's the functionality in the work management system. There's region recommendations we have to issue once we get the operator's response or if they contest our NOPV. A final order is finally issued by the administrator, our associate administrator. Used to be Alan Mayberry. I'm not sure who's taken it. Like I say, I retired several months ago. A remedial work plan, our RWP, is something operators have to submit after they get those final orders to show how they're going to remediate the condition and bring it back into compliance to be able to restart the pipeline. And then there's a compliance registry where all these documents and submissions are sent for the official public record. Finally, I've got a slide here that shows that even with the reduction in force and downsizing of the federal government, actually PHMSA is still hiring in our regions, hiring inspectors and investigators and transportation specialists, people in the mission critical for public safety. We're still, my former agency is still hiring. To apply for a federal position, you have to do it on usajobs.gov for government, usajobs.gov. And PHMSA has also got a website shown here where you could go to learn more about how to apply and more about OPS, that's the Office of Pipeline Safety. And finally, in conclusion, I'm going to show a video on a vacation trip. I went to Alaska, and I've got a clip of me showing standing beside the Alaska pipeline, not in a work capacity, but just I wanted to see that. It was kind of on my bucket list, so I thought I'd conclude the video with a short clip of that. Hope you enjoyed the video.